title slide shows the webinar name, along with logos for Mathematica, Cultivate Learning, and the Virtual Lab School. On the right side of the slide is a photo of a woman and a small child painting. The host, Louisa Tarullo, is shown in the upper right.
Good morning and welcome to this paper symposium, Responsive Relationships in the ECE Workforce, Improving Knowledge and Care for Young Children. I'm Louisa Tarullo, a senior fellow at Mathematica. I'm the project director for the We Grow Together Professional Development System, the OPRE sponsored project that my colleague Shannon Monahan will be sharing with you today. As we get started, first I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Dr. Juliet Taylor is the Senior Director of Programs and Partnerships at Cultivate Learning at the University of Washington's College of Education. Juliet has worked as a clinical psychologist for children and families. She's led work on QRIS, professional development, and Race to the Top at the Washington State Department of Early Learning. And she's worked in philanthropy, supporting quality and equity within educational systems. Next, Dr. Sarah Lang is an assistant professor at the Department of Human Sciences at Ohio State University. She's the director of the Virtual Lab School and the principal investigator of the VLS Momentum project that she will present today. Dr. Shannon Monahan is a senior survey researcher at Mathematica who focuses on developing early childhood assessments and observational measures, understanding programs that serve young children and their parents, supporting the early childhood workforce, and formulating evidence-based practices for educators. Shannon is the deputy project director for We Grow Together. And we're also pleased to have Dr. Rachel Chazen-Cohen from the University of Connecticut as our discussant. Rachel is a national expert on the evaluation and improvement of programs for families with infants and toddlers, including home visiting, childcare, and early Head Start. She specializes in ways to build the competencies of the early childhood workforce, and we're eager to hear her insights on our work.
Slide title, Overview of the 3 interventions. The interventions, Filming Interactions to Nurture Development, VLS Momentum Pilot, and We Grow Together, are shown in a summary table with the column headings of length, focus and scope, audience, coach expertise, and individualized. Details are discussed of each intervention.
To get us started, we'd like to offer an overview of the 3 interventions we'll be hearing about today. As you see on the slide, these interventions vary in length from 10 weeks to 14 months. They have a common focus to support caregiver-child interactions, and they're designed for center-based caregivers and family child care providers. The coach's expertise was commonly bachelor's level with training and/or certification, and the interventions were individualized based on goal setting and observations. And next, we'll turn to Juliet.
Slide title, Filming Interactions to Nurture Development. A photo at the left shows a woman and small child clapping their hands. The speaker is shown in the top right corner.
Hi, I'm Juliet Taylor, a senior director at Cultivate Learning at the University of Washington. At Cultivate Learning, we support the teacher workforce, both in early childhood education and in school age and youth development. We do this by developing professional development products, things like training and higher education coursework, participating in thought partnership with other system leaders, both in Washington State and across the nation, and by conducting community-engaged research and evaluation. I'm so excited to talk more today about a successful intervention that has been scaled throughout Washington State and supported by our coaching infrastructure. It's called FIND, or Filming Interactions to Nurture Development. FIND is based on the research from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University and was developed by our partners at the University of Oregon. FIND is an intervention that really highlights serve and return interactions to strengthen those building relationships between a child and their adult caregiver. In Washington State, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families adapted a version of FIND to be able to use in childcare environments across the state and connected to our quality rating and improvement system. This is a 10-week intervention, and it includes coaching to support the find elements.
Slide title, what does it take to make a great teacher? A photo is shown of a teacher and small child playing with building blocks.
So let's start with the question, what does it take to make a great teacher? Well, first, what we learned from FIND is that it might be about reinforcing the strengths that the provider is already demonstrating in their work with children every day. And that really is the foundation of FIND. It's a strength-based intervention that focuses, one, on the trusting relationship between a child care provider and their coach, and two, it offers a strength-based lens to show providers that they're already doing these great interactions with children that support their development.
Slide title, 5 elements of FIND. A photo shows a toddler sitting in a wading pool.
There are 5 elements of FIND that really emphasize the serve and return interactions. The first is sharing the child's focus, noting what the child is interested in and putting the caregiver's attention there. 2, supporting and encouraging with nurturance and warmth. 3, naming or providing a label to what children see, feel, or hear. Back and forth, those sort of organic interactions that happen in reciprocal relationships. And finally, endings and beginnings. When a child decides that they want to move on to the next activity or area of interest, and the provider seamlessly follows them. These are the 5 elements of FIND, and the way that they are taught is through a video-based intervention between coaches and providers. Here's how it goes. Coaches begin by filming a segment of raw footage in a childcare environment, 10 to 15 minutes of raw footage. And then that footage is sent to a partner editor. In Washington State, those partners are the Children's Home Society of Washington, and they've also been deeply trained in the FIND intervention. The 10 to 15 minute video clips are edited so that coaches are able to find an example of a provider already demonstrating one of these 5 elements. Not only is the video edited to be a smaller example, maybe 30 seconds in length of a total interaction, but it also demonstrates these micro moments. So the video will slow down and show very intentionally how a provider is supporting one of these 5 elements. So for example, a provider might be reading a book to a toddler, and while they're reading, the toddler stops, looks at the page, and points at one of the objects. The provider notices this, looks at the child and says, "Yes, that's the blue truck." That's a great example of naming. Another example might be a toddler is working with blocks, and suddenly they see something across the room that piques their interest. They stop playing with the blocks and move to the next area. The provider notices that their interest has changed and seamlessly follows the child's lead. This is a great example of endings and beginnings. Once the editors find these micro moments and video clips, they send it back to the coach, and the coach then sits down with the provider to review these elements. To show the provider first, they're already doing this. They show them a clip even before they talk about the essential skill in more detail. The power of the intervention is that the things are captured on film prior to going deeper. And educators who participate in FIND tell us that this really helps them attend to all the different ways that children are serving during the day and their opportunities to return that serve.
Slide title, FIND Coaching. A photo shows 2 women seated in a daycare setting.
FIND is supported by intentional coaching. And in Washington State, we started with our coaches who were already working with programs and already had established relationships. All of our coaches have bachelor's degrees in early childhood education or a related field. They're grounded in the relationship-based professional development standards in Washington State and also have a working knowledge of infant and toddler child development. The coaches then went through an intensive training process with our partners at the University of Oregon. That included an initial training and then work in partnership with a consultant at the University of Oregon to test out the fine intervention on with a few programs and have that consultant work with them side by side. Once they feel confident enough, they offered a couple of examples where they were doing this work on their own and then finally become certified in the fine approach. The coach, they work with providers to take video 5 times during the 10-week intervention. So again, each time is about 10 to 15 minutes of raw footage and then sends it to the editors. The coach then meets with the providers over that course of time and reviews the edited clips.
Slide title, Find Evaluation. A photo shows a toddler holding a blue ball and a red ball.
Cultivate Learning had the opportunity to work with our partners at Department of Children, Youth, and Families to evaluate the fine intervention. So over 2 years, we looked at the efficacy of the fine intervention by using a treatment and control group, those providers who were participating in fine coaching and those who were not. We were interested in the impact of the intervention on language, as well as a number of behavioral measures to look at classroom quality. To look at language, we used Lena, a digital language processor that captures verbal language. In Washington, the device was worn by the caregiver, and later a software program analyzed the data and calculated various language characteristics in the form of word counts and conversational turns within a period of time. We also used behavioral observational measures like the classroom assessment scoring system, or CLASS, the parents' interaction with children checklists of observation linked to outcomes, or the Piccolo, and a serve and return observation rating scale. We collected data both before the intervention on pretest and then following the intervention after 3 months of completed, once the providers had completed the fine intervention with their coach. Our specific evaluation questions were: what is the effect of fine on language use and conversational turn taking? What is the effect of fine on caregiver-child interactions? And do programs participating in fine improve their overall classroom quality?
Slide title, Evaluation Results. A photo shows a woman and young child picking carrots in a garden.
And here's what we found. Our evaluation results found that caregivers who received fine coaching were more responsive and encouraging to young children. They engaged in more serve and return interactions. And they used more language facilitation, including using more words per hour, engaging in more conversational turns with children, and fostering more child-initiated interactions. Providers also reported that they had an increased sense of job control. And finally, evaluation results showed that scores on the emotional support and instructional support domains of class increase significantly.
Slide title, Stories from the Field. A photo of Emily and her coach Rachel is shown at the left.
As part of our research, we were able to capture the stories of numerous coach-provider dyads, and I'm going to share a couple of those stories today. So first, meet Emily, a lead toddler teacher in Vancouver, Washington, and Rachel, her coach. Emily works with children and families who are often experiencing difficult and challenging life circumstances. For example, many of the kids that she cares for are currently within the foster care system. Emily tells us that toddlers often come to her classroom from backgrounds of severe physical and mental trauma, maybe been exposed to environments where there's drugs or abandonment, or living in poverty. And although she finds her work extraordinarily fulfilling, it's taxing work and sometimes very difficult to meet the complex needs of the children that she cares for. Rachel received intensive coach training in fine, and she instantly knew it would be a great fit for Emily. She told us that, quote, serve and return is super important because it acknowledges children's emotions and helps each child feel seen, heard, and understood. As a result of participating in fine, Emily told us that she is much less overwhelmed and that fine has been a life changer. She shared that FIND has not only changed her teaching practices, but she also believes it's really changed the life trajectories for the children and families that she works with. She tells us, quote, "I know how to give kids the words to describe what they're feeling. I can say, looks like this really makes you mad. It's okay to be mad." And you can say that you're mad. Through FIND coaching, Emily has learned tangible language to head off challenging behaviors, to be receptive to eye contact and other serves from children, and to respond immediately with warmth and support. She shared that she still has exhausting and occasional bad days, but she told us, quote, "I know now that I've also had these wonderful moments of positivity helping children's development. When I go over problems, I can relate to them as thousands of short moments, like in the video clips. And if parents or others question her approaches," Emily says, "I can educate them just as I've been educated."
A photo of Laura and her coach sitting side by side is shown at the left.
Next, let's meet Laura, a licensed family child care provider in Quincy, Washington, and her coach, Victor. Laura owns and operates a business in a small community with a teacher assistant and her 2 daughters. When Victor first approached her about coaching using FIND, she was initially nervous, especially about the video aspect. She worried, what if the video captures something that I'm not doing well? And despite her many, many years of practice in the field, Laura had never had an opportunity to have a coach really highlight her strengths and what she is already doing well with children. After talking with Victor, she became more comfortable and embraced the idea of seeing herself on film and using the FIND approach. She told us, quote, "Every day we have the weight of our work on our shoulders, and maybe we don't have the time to stop and watch what we're doing very closely." That's a comment about the use of video and the power that it can offer for us to really reflect on those daily interactions. When the first videos were being reviewed, Victor told us he saw a breakthrough, like a light bulb moment for Laura. She was learning to add more meaning to every child-initiated interaction. For example, when a child picked up a book after nap time, she not only noted that the child was engaged, but initiated a conversation with the child to learn more about their interest in the content. Victor talked to us about the skills that are needed to build interactions with children, noting, quote, "Connection is not spontaneous. It's something that you grow day by day along with your relationships." He says, speaking about serve and return interactions, it can happen like 100 times in 1, 2, 3 minutes. But even an experienced provider like Laura needed the video-based coaching to really recognize those moments. And Laura agrees with her coach, telling us, quote, "Everything became clearer and more comprehensible with the FIND coaching intervention." As you can see, the power of FIND is really in the stories. And even the most experienced providers have told us that they recognize more opportunities for serve and return throughout their day and work with children. Now, I want to tell you about some updates that have happened to the FIND intervention since the pandemic. In March, the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families began working to co-adapt and co-create a remote version of FIND. This included developing technology platforms and training and technical manuals for coaches, and then also developing training and supports for providers to navigate this new virtual world. It also meant learning to work with new challenges, things like internet access and parent consents for remote FIND intervention. Although there was an initial pause, stakeholders warmed up to the idea of remote FIND. And since September, we've seen an increase in the spread and use of the remote version. Part of this is because providers since that time have increased their enrollment and opened their doors after the pandemic. And this intervention is continually being refined. We learn more every day. The other thing that this has offered us is a chance to take valuable lessons learned from the FIND intervention and apply them to other things that are happening in the early learning system within Washington State. For example, our current QRIS Early Achievers is being adapted to look at quality by the use of video practices that are taken in various learning environments. What we learned from FIND is this strength-based approach is really critical to support providers to feel comfortable with video and to allow them to really learn the benefits of practice change by looking closer at the subtle nuances that happen in these serve and return interactions. Our lessons from FIND in both the remote adaptation, but also just the strength-based approach have certainly influenced other system efforts in Washington. Another development is that the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families began offering continuing education credits to teachers who participate in the FIND intervention with their coach. It comes with a couple of additional elements, including some knowledge checks and reflective practice with their coaches. But teachers in large have really embraced the opportunity to earn continuing education hours. And it's a note that in order to have a successful initiative really sustained throughout a system, you have to continually think about how to engage incentives to keep the momentum going forward. We continue to learn more about video coaching, and educators continue to benefit from the FIND intervention across Washington State. I'd like to thank our partners at the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families who administer the FIND intervention, our partners at the University of Oregon, and also all of the coach participants and our educators who are working every day to support children and families. I'd also like to thank all of the listeners today for the opportunity to share more about the FIND initiative in Washington, a bright spot in our early learning landscape. Thank you so much.
Slide title, Examining VLS Momentum, Pairing Online PD with Coaching to Prepare Teachers for their CDA. A video thumbnail of Dr. Sarah Lang is seen in the upper right.
Hello, I'm Sarah Lang, and it is my pleasure to share this preliminary glimpse at a project we recently concluded in our home state of Ohio. We'll be sharing some information about our pilot project that leverages the Virtual Lab School Professional Development Training System to support early childhood teachers in developing their foundational understanding of quality early care and education, and preparing them to earn their Child Development Associate or CDA. I'll be highlighting our relationship-based approach in this endeavor. I'm honored to represent this project in this video presentation, but want to acknowledge the strong contributions of my co-authors, Dr. Rosalie O'Dean, PH candidate Erin Tebben, and Dr. Cynthia Bittner. So we know that the early care and education, or ECE workforce, is diverse. More than 47% of center-based ECE teachers or caregivers do not hold any kind of degree. And of those without degrees, we know that less than 40% have a Child Development Associate or a CDA. Thus, there is a substantial portion of the ECE field that does not have the foundational training in child development and best practices in ECE. From previous research, we also know that ensuring access and skill-based support such as tutoring, as well as financial support are effective ways to increase the educational level of adults working in ECE. In addition, there's accumulating evidence that interventions that to positively change ECE professionals' practices and knowledge are most successful when they combine high-quality training with the follow-up of coaching support. And that coaching is most effective when there is strong attention paid to the partnership formed between the ECE teacher and their coach. The VLS Momentum project we'll share with you today really builds on this knowledge and implements an approach that pairs high-quality online professional development training with intensive individualized practice-based coaching to support ECE providers without a foundational credential in the field in earning, that critical foundation necessary to support children.
The website address for the Virtual Lab School is www.virtuallabschool.org. That is www.virtuallabschool.org.
So the VLS Momentum project leverages the professional development system that was originally created for the U.S. Department of Defense. So developed out of a partnership that began roughly 10 years ago between the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and Ohio State, the Virtual Lab School was born, what we call the VLS. The VLS has become the professional development training system for all military-affiliated childcare programs. The VLS project currently serves over 30,000 people working in military-affiliated childcare programs throughout the world. And our content, which is publicly available, and I highlight the web address here on this slide, was accessed by just under 1 million visitors last year alone, with over 8.3 million page views. For the VLS Momentum project, we specifically utilized the infant, toddler, and preschool tracks, each of which contain 15 foundational courses that focus on ECE practices aligned with the CDA functional areas and competencies. We also utilize several of our focus topics courses to further support particular competencies, such as supporting young children with challenging behavior or using trauma-informed practices, to help participants earn the total 120 clock hours of training necessary to apply for their CDA.
Slide title, VLS Momentum, Larger Programmatic Project. A photo shows a woman hugging a toddler in a daycare setting. Highlights of the sample are shown in bullet points and are discussed. The project includes 29 child care centers with 135 teachers.
We want to share a bit more information about our wider programmatic sample and our targeted population served. And then in the next slide, I'll share about our specific research consented sample. So we originally recruited more than 50 childcare programs and more than 200 infant, toddler, and preschool teachers in Central Ohio. And some of the teachers just participated in the programmatic piece. I'll highlight our state is similar to many other states and to military-affiliated childcare programs in that we only require a person be 18 years of age, pass a background check, and hold a high school diploma or GED to work in an early care and education program. And much of our state's ECE workforce does not hold a credential or degree in field, and perhaps most importantly, may not hold the foundational knowledge and skills to support child development. However, in the fall of 2020, our state, Ohio, began requiring that all programs that receive publicly funded child care dollars be in our state's Quality Rating and Improvement System, or QRIS. But we also know that one barrier to programs' participation in our QRIS was the level of their staff members' education. So we partnered with our local municipality and a local nonprofit, Future Ready Columbus, to identify programs who provide publicly funded childcare to at least 10 children in their program, and programs that were not currently in our state's QRIS or who had lower program quality ratings. And we worked directly with these programs to recruit teachers without a CDA to provide free professional development. Our project ran for about 16 months from September of 2019 and just ended in December of 2020. And I'll highlight here that our coach caseload averaged about 25 teachers per coach, but 2 of our coaches played a kind of a lead role on the team and had fewer assigned teachers.
Slide title, VLS Momentum, Research Sample. A photo shows a woman sitting with 3 toddlers in a daycare setting. The sample included 77 coach and teacher pairs, with 41 infant toddler teachers and 36 preschool teachers. The average teacher age was 35 years old. Teachers had from 1 to 8 years of experience, with an average of 4.3 years of experience. 28% of teachers reported speaking a language other than English. Languages included Arabic, Chinese, French, Somali, Spanish, and Tagalog. Teacher demographics were 64% white, 32% Black, and 4% biracial. 4% of teachers were Hispanic or Latinx. 96% of teachers were female.
Now some highlights from our research-specific sample. So a total of 77 individuals consented to share their training records with us for analysis and fill out additional pre- and post-test surveys about themselves and the VLS Momentum program. I'll just highlight that our research participants had an average of about 4.3 years of experience in the field, and more than a quarter of them spoke languages, other languages in addition to English. And about 2/3 of our participants identified as white, and about 1/3 as Black or African American. An additional 4% reported being of Hispanic or Latinx heritage. And this is reflective of the larger population in Columbus.
The graphic displays the 6 steps in the course completion cycle. The arrows move around an oval shape from 1. Pre-assessment, 2. Course enrollment, 3. Lessons and/or activity completion and review, 4. Observation and competency review, 5. Post-assessment, and 6. Certification. Blue and orange wedge shapes around the outside of the oval detail the participant and coach activities.
So in our pilot, teachers were given the opportunity to take 21 courses on the VLS Momentum site, and within each course receive feedback on their knowledge and practices from their coach. So this figure here represents sort of our course completion cycle. The blue wedges show the actions taken by the teacher, and those kind of light orange wedges, the actions taken by the coach. So teachers and coaches shared responsibility for that course completion cycle. First, teachers would complete a brief pre-test that helped their coach know their kind of beginning understanding of that particular course content. The teacher then enrolled them in the course, and the coach enrolled them in the course, and the teacher then completed the lessons by reading and watching the content and submitting various activities to their coach for feedback. And the coach then reviewed these and provided individualized support. The coach also observed the provider using a special tool, what we called our competency reflection, that outlines the critical practices specific to that enrolled course. The provider also used this competency reflection as a self-reflective tool to relay their understanding of their proficiency in the practices in that course. And the participant also completes a post-course knowledge assessment. And then together, at the end of all this, the coach and the provider identified that teacher's strengths and goals in the course's focal area, and the coach certified that course, and the provider moved on to the next course in the cycle. It's important to note here, with the emergence of COVID-19, the observations and in-person meetings we were originally conducting in centers, going in once a week or once every other week, transformed into phone calls and Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime conversations. As teachers progressed through the coursework, they also completed the required items necessary for their CDA portfolio. So really, with the hope being that upon completion, participants would not only have the necessary 120 clock hours, but have a portfolio ready to share with their CDA assessor and lots of practice completing competency assessments. So they were well prepared for the CDA exam and to be observed in their practice by that CDA assessor. So we collected a large amount of data in this project, and I'm only sharing a tiny bit of it with you today. So I'm going to highlight briefly what we know so far about, once again, our research consented sample. So we'll show some information on course completion data, pre-post test changes from the first 5 courses that participants completed, and then focusing on that relationship-based aspect. We'll share information on the number and type of email exchanges that teachers and coaches had, the number of debrief or coaching conversations that participants experienced, and then participants' own perceptions of the coaching support they received.
The graph on the slide displays the number of research participants who completed each course. The x-axis lists the VLS course, and the y-axis numbers the participants from 0 to 80. The graph shows a steady decline from 70 participants completing the Child Abuse Identification and Reporting course to 18 participants completing courses on sexual development and behavior and trauma-informed care.
So first, we can see that participating teachers progressed through the VLS Momentum coursework actually in the same order. So they all went through in a prescribed way. This graph represents the number of course completions across the entire 12 to 16-month program, depending on when a person was enrolled. Notice that 70 of our research participants completed the first course and 18 completed the entire program. Undoubtedly, the pandemic influenced teachers' participation, and we plan to examine this in more depth, but it's important to note that teachers progressed through the coursework at their own pace. So although we had a targeted timeline of completion for each course, and that we shared that with participants to support the overall program completion in about 10 to 12 months, coaches did work flexibly with each teacher to support their individual circumstances and needs. So next, I'm going to share with you sort of our pre to post test findings. So all of our teachers, once again, completed a short knowledge assessment before each course, and then a knowledge assessment at the end. These knowledge assessments consisted of both multiple choice and short answer questions. We are still in the process of analyzing these tests. So today I just share with you the results of the first 5 courses, specifically looking at the multiple choice questions only. And then I also share the short answer findings for that first course. In this slide, I present the infant toddler data, and the preschool data will be on the next slide in the same format. We share them this way today simply for simplicity of visuals for right now. We have not yet analyzed differences across these 2 groups. It's important to note that because one of our goals was to ensure that participants reach a certain level of competency, participants that did not pass the post-assessment on their first attempt could receive additional support from their coach and retake the test. In addition, they were given the option to complete only the multiple choice questions again if their short answer responses were strong on their first attempt. And these results here show our one-way ANOVAs. So because of this format that folks could retest, we wanted to look at scores on participants' first attempt at the post-test, which is represented in columns 3 and 4, and their final attempt where they passed in columns 4 and 5. Overall, we do see improvement from pre to post-test assessments. And for the courses where we don't see significant improvement, it looks like teachers already started with a higher baseline knowledge. On the short answers, very few teachers actually required more than a single attempt. So we are only presenting the first post-test attempt within those short answers. We can see that teachers' knowledge improved quite a bit in these short answer questions, and we're excited to look at this more with other courses. It's important to note within our data analysis and methodology, the short answer responses were blind coded as to whether they were pre or post-test answers. So here we see the infant toddler, and then again, for preschool teachers, we see a similar pattern to that of the infant toddler track, again showing improvement, particularly to that pre to final post-test. It's worth noting that there were fewer preschool teachers participating in this sample, so these tests had less power. So let's look now, we're going to focus in again just on our research sample. We know that more than 6,000 emails were sent and received between teachers and coaches, and an average of 80 emails per participant. And emails were one critical way that coaches supported participants' engagement with the VLS coursework. They provided assistance when participants maybe had difficulty logging in or playing videos or recording their work, but they also provided relational and content-based support, right? By congratulating them on course completion, checking in with their course progress, and really delivering feedback on those completed assignments. Within this work, we can see that about 55 to 60% of the emails sent and received were related to the actual content of the VLS and feedback on teachers' work. And about 25 to 30% were more relational in scope, with coaches checking in on participants and sharing additional resources and information, and participants reaching out to coaches with updates about their progress. So importantly, these emails between coaches and participants demonstrate how coaches provide access-based and content-based support for the teachers in our study and made it easier for them to benefit for the coursework. Another way that coaches engage with participants was through in-person or later phone call and Zoom connections in these debrief or coaching conversations. So after each VLS course, coaches completed a debrief session to help reinforce the course content, identify strengths in the teacher's practices, and work together to set goals for that area of their practice. Discussion of the competency reflection mentioned earlier were a critical part of these debrief conversations. So once again, just looking at our research, consented 77 participants, over 1,000 debrief sessions were conducted for them with an average of 14.6 debriefs sessions per participant. When we look just at those who completed the full 21 courses, we see that these participants average a 29 debrief sessions with a mean of 1.4 sessions per course. So these results really speak to the impact of having a coach available to reinforce the course content. And if participants didn't get the content in the first go around, then they could get that additional support necessary. It was common for participants to have more than one debrief session on a topic. And when we think about this in other PD models or professional development models, these participants would likely leave with incomplete or inaccurate information.
Slide title, Participants' Perception of the Value of Coaching. A table at the left states, in general, the coaching sessions help me better understand and apply the information from the online training. 23.1% of participants somewhat agree, and 76.9% of participants strongly agree. A table at the right states, I learned many things from my coach that will help me be a better teacher. 11.5% of participants somewhat agree, and 88.5% of participants strongly agree.
So I'm also going to quickly share participants' perceptions of the value of coaching. So coaching as a means for increasing content-based support, we can also see this within our post-test survey. So according to the results, participants, and this was a sample of 26 right here, overwhelmingly felt that coaching was a valuable resource that helped them learn and apply the information covered in the online materials. Nearly all strongly agreed that their coach helped them learn things that helped them be a better teacher. Our results showed that teachers improved their knowledge through participation in the VLS, and these surveys results suggest that there is an additive value of coaching over and above the online coursework component of the VLS.
On this slide, 3 speech bubbles depict quotes from participants about how they valued coaching. A purple speech bubble on the left reads, "She asked questions that helped me to think differently and gave me ideas. Some things she explained differently than what I was reading, so I could understand better." A teal speech bubble at the center of the bottom of the slide reads, "She knows how to understand me when I'm struggling with English since it's not my first language. She's trying to do herself on how I can understand everything to the best of my knowledge." A blue speech bubble at the upper right of the slide reads, "She helped me understand how I truly connected with the children. She made me feel like I was in the right field."
So not only visible within those quantitative results, but in the actual words from our participants. So these are some quotes that highlight some of the themes of our participants' responses to how coaching was helpful to them. And I'll just highlight here in the interest of time, the quote in blue, which is my personal favorite, illustrates the value of coaching for a potential longer range outcome, longevity of teachers in the field. Our coach was able, according to this teacher, to help the teacher feel that they truly belong in early childhood.
Slide title, Participants' Perception of the Coaching Relationship. A table at the left states, "My coach and I formed a strong professional relationship." 3.8% of participating teachers strongly disagree, 26.9% somewhat agree, and 69.2% strongly agree. A table at the right states, "I could rely on my coach to help me when I was stuck." 3.8% of participating teachers somewhat disagree, 19.9% somewhat agree, and 76.9% strongly agree.
In addition to feeling their coaching was helpful at improving their practice, the participants in the VLS study nearly universally felt that they positively about the coaching relationship itself, or that coaching partnership, which is important given all that we know about that learning happens within those contexts of relationships. So the overwhelming majority of our participants agreed or strongly agreed that they formed a strong professional relationship with their coach and they could rely on them when they felt stuck. There was a small incidence of participants feeling less positively, and this is something we're interested in exploring later. So again, here's some qualitative responses relative to that. We can see that coaches became friends and mentors. Though I will highlight, we had a very small set of participants that felt the coaching relationship was more about the student-teacher, right, perspective. And so while this wasn't the prevailing theme of the majority of our participants, it does reflect the need to consider teachers' perspectives and needs when designing coaching interventions.
The graphic illustrates that coaching provides a bridge between knowledge and practice.
So in terms of overarching things we'd like to emphasize, we know that coaching within our study increased participants' access to content, enhanced their ability to understand and apply the material, and provided them with a supportive relationship within which to take risks, learn, and grow their practice. And exciting, coaches help teachers feel a part of the profession. This program represents a key attempt to retain and serve those currently in the field. These kind of supports are critical if we want to help maintain a racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse workforce in ECE. Lastly, I just want to highlight, we know from research across human development that learning happens in the context of relationships. This is a central tenet of what we emphasize in high quality ECE for children. Our preliminary findings provide additional evidence. It should also be a central tenet of supporting adults in ECE.
The email address for Dr. Lang is lang.279@osu.edu. Websites for the virtual lab are cbus.virtuallabschool.org, www.virtuallabschool.org, and www.virtuallabschool.org/osu-online-aa-degree.
And as we wrap up, like all good things, this was really a group effort. So I really want to identify the generous support of our funders, particularly Future Ready Columbus. I also want to recognize that this project was possible because we could leverage the amazing professional development system that we've had the opportunity to build with the U.S. Department of Defense, and the incredible hard work of the wonderful coaches who were part of the VLS Momentum project. And to thank the teachers who were part of it. We have 5 of whom now we know have earned their CDA, and we're just so excited. And then lastly, we continue to have a wonderful research staff that helps us analyze this data. So our appreciation goes out to the grad and undergrad and research staff on the project. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shannon Monahan, and on behalf of my colleagues from Mathematica, Sally Atkins-Burnett, Louisa Tarullo, and Ann Lee, I will be describing a field test of the We Grow Together professional development system. We Grow Together was developed as part of the Professional Development Tools to Improve the Quality of Infant and Toddler Care project, funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Administration for Children and Families. We carried out a field test of the We Grow Together system from fall 2018 through spring 2019. In this presentation, I will describe key findings from a literature review that influenced our approach to developing We Grow Together, provide a brief description of We Grow Together, and share findings from the field test that focus on the relationship between infant and toddler caregivers and their coach. Children's early, supportive interactions with adults during the first 3 years of life are instrumental to the development of their language, cognitive, and social skills. Early childhood professionals need to understand children's capacity to learn and how to promote young children's development and learning. Most studies seeking to understand how professional development can change teacher beliefs, knowledge, and practice have focused on teachers of preschool and school-age children. Those caring for infants and toddlers often have less access to and fewer opportunities for sustained and systematic professional development. Yet research has shown that the first few years of life are especially dramatic in terms of brain development. There is a clear need for research examining the potential benefits of different forms of professional development for caregivers serving infants and toddlers. In 2016, Mathematica published a literature review summarizing the most effective or promising methods and approaches for improving caregiver interactions with young children. We identified several themes from the literature that were specific to coaching. We know that professional development coaching is most effective when it is sustained, actively engages caregivers, and emphasizes respectful coach-caregiver relationships. Coaching strategies that may benefit infant and toddler caregivers include building trusting relationships, goal setting, practice, frequent feedback, modeling, active learning, self-reflection, and coaching based on video recorded practice and quality observations. The literature review findings informed the development of We Grow Together, which is a professional development system for caregivers working with infants and toddlers in center-based care and family child care homes. The system emphasizes a practice-based coaching approach within a trusting relationship with a trained PD provider. PD providers and coaches have access to easy-to-use online materials designed to support the coaching process and foster high-quality interactions between caregivers and infants and toddlers. In the field test, we drew on locally available PD providers and provided training for them prior to the start of implementation. We Grow Together is based on the research and recommended best practices for interacting with infants and toddlers that are measured with the QSIT observational tool. Following the practices identified in the QSIT, We Grow Together helps caregivers support children's social emotional development, language and literacy, and cognitive development. Similar to QSIT, responsiveness is a key concept woven throughout We Grow Together.
Slide title, Key Components of WGT. A flow chart illustrates the movement of the QSIT observational measure results to the We Grow Together website, which then branches off to PD provider tools and caregiver tools. The tools then flow back and forth to trained PD providers and caregivers.
Because the core content of We Grow Together is rooted in the constructs and high-quality practices in the QSIT observational measure, in this study, an observation with the QSIT measure was the starting point for the professional development process to help focus PD providers and caregivers on learning practices that would be of greatest benefit to the caregivers. We Grow Together includes an array of PD tools organized into modules and delivered online. Data from the QSIT observations provides a profile of areas for growth in the caregivers' practices, and that data guides the selection of modules on the We Grow Together website for each caregiver. The caregiver tools were designed for use in the context of relationships with a trusted local PD provider. And PD providers are supported in implementation of We Grow Together by their own PD provider tools. During the 2018 to 2019 field test, a local PD provider who was trained in guiding the caregiver through the use of the caregiver tools was encouraged to meet regularly with the caregiver. In our field test, caregivers and PD providers worked together using the We Grow Together resources for up to 4 months. For caregivers, We Grow Together began with a video-based introduction to the website. For PD providers, We Grow Together began with an online PD provider training. We recommended that caregivers and PD providers meet weekly to discuss the caregiver's preferences and areas of interest, select a module and key practice to work on, collaboratively set goals, and develop an action plan to use specific We Grow Together resources to address areas of practice. During implementation of the field test, Mathematica provided a number of supports to PD providers and caregivers through a help desk, hotline, office hours, and additional methods of communication.
Slide title, Who are the participants in the WGT field test? A pie chart at the right breaks down the percentage of caregiver PD providers pairs by caregiver setting. 46% were community center based, 33% were EHS center based, 6% were EHS FCC, and 15% were community FCC.
The field test made use of intentional sampling so that the study included a diverse sample of caregivers with a range of qualifications and professional experiences from 10 geographic areas spanning 14 states and the District of Columbia. But the sample was not representative of PD providers and caregivers nationally. The analytic sample included 271 caregivers paired with a total of 168 PD providers across early Head Start and community-based centers, as well as family child care homes. During the field test, some PD providers worked with more than one caregiver.
Slide title, Who are the participants? Continued. The average number of college courses in early childhood education was 3.9 for caregivers and 5.5 for providers. 50% of caregivers had an associate's degree or higher, and 76% of PD providers had a bachelor's degree or higher. The average age for caregivers was 38.7 years old and 46.2 years old for PD providers. Further details on the demographics are discussed by the speaker.
About half of the caregivers in the We Grow Together field test had received an associate's degree or higher. The most common field of study for caregivers was early care and education. The caregivers in We Grow Together were racially and ethnically diverse. They were also predominantly female and ranged in age from 18 to 73 years. Most of the PD providers in We Grow Together had attained a bachelor's degree or higher and commonly studied early childhood education. 55% of PD providers identified as white, 31% as Black or African American, 18% as Hispanic or Latino, and 11% as other racial and ethnic groups. Almost all of the PD providers were female, and they ranged in age from 22 to 72 years. Almost half of all caregivers had worked previously with their We Grow Together PD provider. On average, they reported having a positive relationship with this provider at baseline, with mean ratings of a 3.8 on a 4-point rating scale. Those caregivers reported working with their We Grow Together PD provider for an average of 4.6 years. Outside of We Grow Together, the PD providers typically worked with an average of 13 to 14 caregivers in total.
Slide title, How often did PD providers and caregivers communicate about their practice? A pie chart at the right shows the percentage of caregivers by average monthly communication with PD provider. 28% communicated more than once, 34% twice a month, 23% once a week, 11% more than once a week, and 5% never communicated.
On average, caregivers reported meeting more than once a month to discuss their We Grow Together practices with their We Grow Together PD provider, including both in-person and virtual meetings. Caregivers reported communicating with their PD provider most frequently in person, followed by communicating through email, phone calls, and texts.
A bar chart shows how much time PD providers and caregivers spent on the WGT website. 33% of caregivers and 31% of PD providers spent more than 2 hours, but less than 3 hours. The range was from 0 to more than 10 hours.
We looked at the amount of time spent on the We Grow Together website. Almost everyone logged into the website at least once. Caregivers spent an average total of 3.9 hours over the course of the field test on the website, while PD providers spent an average total of 4.2 hours on the website over the course of the study. This measure does not capture the amount of time PD providers and caregivers may have spent reviewing or using the coaching materials offline. PD providers mentioned when speaking with our team that caregivers also access the We Grow Together website content through their PD providers or peer caregivers accounts or printed We Grow Together materials. One question we explored in our field test was, how do caregivers describe their relationship with their PD provider? Caregivers overwhelmingly reported having positive and trusting relationships with their PD providers. On a 4-point scale of how frequently the statement is true, caregivers reported it was usually true that their PD provider was someone who showed them respect, whom they trusted, and with whom they felt comfortable asking questions. Caregivers also reported working collaboratively with their PD providers, most commonly reporting that they worked collaboratively to set goals. When asked about their goal-setting processes, they reported their goals were almost always individualized to their experience or needs. Fewer caregivers reported always using a goal-setting framework such as SMART goals to guide goal setting. Another question we explored was, does PD provider support for using We Grow Together influence changes in caregivers' interactions with infants and toddlers?
A table displays changes in caregivers' self-efficacy. The y-axis maps standard deviation units of difference in self-efficacy. The x-axis summarizes 3 attributes of professional development providers that impacted teacher self-efficacy. Professional development provider attendance at training was associated with a 0.12 increase in teacher self-efficacy. Caregiver reports that professional development providers contributed to professional effectiveness corresponded with a 0.14 increase. Professional development provider attendance at implementation webinars was associated with a decrease of 0.15 standard deviations.
We asked the caregivers in the fall and the spring about their own self-efficacy. That is their perceived ability to be effective in caring for and supporting the development of the infants and toddlers in their care. Caregivers reported significantly stronger self-efficacy in the spring than in the fall. In multivariate models that controlled for caregiver, classroom, and setting characteristics, we found significant positive effects for the number of We Grow Together trainings that the PD provider attended, and the caregiver's perception of how much their PD provider contributed to the caregiver's professional effectiveness. Specifically, for each additional We Grow Together training session attended by the PD provider, the effect size was 0.12, a little more than 1/10 of a standard deviation change in caregivers' self-efficacy. The effect size for the Z-scored rating of how much the PD provider contributed to their professional development was 0.14. A negative effect size was found with PD provider attendance at optional implementation webinars. Based on questions and comments during these webinars, we suspect that the attendance at these optional implementation webinars was most frequent among PD providers who had less skill and experience in coaching.
Title: Caregivers Change in Observed Quality of Caregiver-Child Interactions. A bar chart shows that scores improved from fall 2018 to spring 2019 in the total QSIT score, the support for social emotional development score, and the support for language and literacy development score. The score for support for cognitive development decreased an amount that was not significant.
This graph shows mean QSIT scores in the fall and spring without adjustments. Average scores for caregivers participating in We Grow Together improved in the support for social emotional development domain of the QSIT. This finding aligned with our original study hypothesis that support for social emotional development, in particular responsiveness, would improve given that it is a hallmark of We Grow Together module practices. The differences in fall to spring mean scores in other domains were not significant.
Slide title: Change in Practice Associated with the Use of We Grow Together. A table displays standard deviations of difference across QSIT domains in We Grow Together dosage and professional development provider contributions. The QSIT scores had a standard deviation of 0.12, support for social emotional development was 0.6, support for language and literacy development was 0.16, and support for cognitive development was 0.11. The speaker goes in detail about the results.
Next, we looked at multi-level multivariate models that included caregiver, classroom, and program characteristics as covariates. We used a dosage indicator and the caregiver's ratings of how well the PD providers supported their professional effectiveness as predictors of the spring QSIT scores. Controlling for the fall score, our dosage indicator was based on website analytics of the number of pages that the caregiver opened on the website. The We Grow Together dosage indicator had a significant effect on the overall spring QSIT scores of more than 1/10 of a standard deviation. The dosage indicator was not detectable for the support for social emotional domain after controlling for other characteristics. Among the different domains of quality, the dosage indicator had the strongest effect size for support for language and literacy development. And the dosage indicator was also significant for support for cognitive development. As indicated by the orange bar, caregivers who reported that their providers supported their professional effectiveness made greater gains in supporting cognitive development. Overall, caregivers reported satisfaction with their relationship with the PD provider. The providers influence caregivers' feelings of self-efficacy and influence caregivers' supportive interactions with children in the cognitive domain.
Title: Caregivers report of how WGT practices help children in their classroom. More than 98% of caregivers, overall and across different settings and different We Grow Together practices, reported that using the WGT practices help infants and toddlers. A bar chart illustrates caregiver responses to the Spring 2019 WGT Caregiver Feedback Survey questions about the extent to which they agree that each different practice helped infants and toddlers. The practices included interaction with other infants and toddlers, using language, interacting with the caregiver or other adults in positive ways, thinking, learning, and solving problems, managing behavior and emotions, developing early literacy and interest in books, and understanding the learning about words and sentences.
We asked caregivers whether and how the practices in We Grow Together help to support the development of the children in their classrooms. Almost all caregivers agreed that the practices in We Grow Together supported children across each of the areas of development that we listed. So while caregivers felt supported by PD providers, they felt children were supported by their own use of the We Grow Together practices. We are very grateful to the caregivers, PD providers, and early childhood settings who participated in We Grow Together and shared their feedback with us. We are grateful to the experts who advised us and our partners at 0 to 3 in the University of Oklahoma. We are also grateful to ACF's Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and in particular to our project officers, who you can see listed here.
Contacts: Shannon Monahan, SMONAHAN @mathematica-mpr.com. Sally Atkins Burnett, SATKINS-BURNETT @mathematica-mpr.com. Louisa Tarullo, LTARULLO @mathematica-mpr.com. OPRE contacts: Ann Rivera, ANN.RIVERA@acf.hhs.gov. Janessa Malin, JENESSA.MALIN@acf.hhs.gov. Details on this project can be found at www.acf.hhs.gov/OPRE/the-quality-of-infant-toddler-care-CQ-CCIIT-PD-tools.
To learn more about the We Grow Together professional development system or the professional development tools to improve the quality of infant and toddler care project, please contact our team at Mathematica or OPRE or visit our website. Thank you very much.